With our farming system at Edible Acres, we tend to really pack a lot of plants pretty close together. I think a very prime candidate of just the theoretical limit, the upper end of how much can be planted in an area, is right behind me. This is to the west of our driveway, just next to the road. Pretty busy road. I'm filming this on a Sunday, so it's quieter. I'd like to take a look at this area through the lens of how much can you fit in a marginal and small space. The area we'll be looking at starts from the north of the garage, or the north of the firewood shed, and goes down to the road, our living wall. It's about 60 feet in this direction, or 20 meters, and 45 feet in that direction, or 15 meters. And I'll put up the total amount of acreage. It is a tiny little slice. Let's break down what's actually happening in here. We'll start right at the firewood shed and head towards the road. Tucked in this extremely shaded microclimate is a little micro nursery of potted plants for this season. We have some leftover hazelnuts and apricots and peaches and things like that. So in the deep, deep shade, they're able to get potted up and relax, and then we can bring them out and offer them up. In here is Hablitzia, or Caucasian mountain spinach, which also likes the shade, can wind its way up and get into these elderberries. These are 4 Marge elderberries, 1, 2, 3, 4, that we manage in a pollarding style, which means we head them back at a comfortable pruning height. You can see this is all this year's growth, and this allows for enough light to get into the next layer, which we'll talk about in a moment, this bed here, and also allows us to harvest cuttings. It also makes the firewood shed a lot more invisible once midsummer is happening. We're in early mid-May, and it's just beginning the work. This was all blank this winter, but this will fill out very nicely, offer shade and protection for some nursery stuff. And so even just within a few feet of the firewood shed is a nice production of medicine and nursery plant material and some visual barrier. Just to the east of these elderberries is a pretty major character. This was a seedling apple, an ornamental or a crab apple that was here I cut back about 10 years ago, and when it resprouted over time, grafted it over to 7 different varieties of apples. You can see these giant graft unions here. This was from 2016, and then there was a number that were done in 2020. So this one cluster of trees here has, I think, 7 or 8 different varieties. There's a mixture of cider apples and winter storage apples. Chipmunks get a lot of them. The birds eat a lot of the flowers. It's a very beautiful amount of plant material. I do need to thin it at some point. I haven't done that, but it rains down apples in the fall, enough to the point where I have to be careful about the plastic on our firewood shed. Probably about 8 years ago, I mashed a couple rotten pawpaw fruits in the fall to the north of this group of apple trees, and now we've got this little thicket of pawpaws. There's about 7 or 8 little seedlings in here, probably more than should be in the long run, but we'll let them figure themselves out. They've got definitely enough to do some pollination, and they're competent and comfortable in the understory of the apple. So we've got a guild of many varieties of apples conferring shade and protection to a small thicket of pawpaw. We get into this one bed that's about 4 feet by 16 feet, and there's just so much going on, it would take a little while to really break it down. I'll point out some highlights. We've got a ground cover of mint root, which is a really nice perennial vegetable and beautiful ground cover and nectar offer. Got these gorgeous purple tulips popping up as spring color. We've pushed those bulbs in arbitrarily all throughout here. They come up and then they'll disappear within a month or so. There's an apothecary rose, which will make extremely nice large flowers that Sasha harvests the petals of for winter use. This is suckering and thicket forming, so we'll start digging these up and offering them through the nursery at some point. On the south side are cultivar irises of a whole bunch of different colors. The mint root gets weeded and fed to the irises as needed, but they seem to be pretty compatible. As time goes on, we'll start cutting the rose back as needed to keep it in check, and that will release light to this goji berry, which will be able to fill out and be another shrub layer in this spot. We'll take tons of cuttings from this to keep it monitored and not expanding too much. To the north of that is a Lutoka rose sour cherry, which is loaded with immense amounts of tiny fruits so far this season. They should fill out nicely since we haven't had a frost. Hundreds and hundreds of nice sized cherries should be in orbit here relatively soon. The understory to that has horseradish growing throughout. There's a ton of sunchokes that we no longer want, so we're pulling them as time allows and laying them down as mulch to feed the other characters that we actually want in here. The Lutoka rose casts shade to the north, and that's compatible with a black currant happily growing and doing its work underneath there. We'll weed as needed and feed that back to the currant, but it's pretty competent handling the shade, so we just tucked that one right in there. There's a skirret in here and a dwarf sour cherry that are popping up. The skirret's been here for years and years. It likes full sun, but it's doing okay in the shade, and it drops tons of seeds into the walkway. We let the seedlings grow for a year or two and then dig them up and move them on. Works out pretty well. This redbud showed up as a friend arbitrarily. We tend to let them grow when they show up, and this is conferring nitrogen to the soil and could be a scaffold for a vining layer that we've yet to design into this. There's echinacea and yarrow and some other medicinal perennials, and it's kind of weedy in here too, but that's fine. It's not really in the way yet, and as needed, like I said, I can always pull sunchokes or chop and drop mint root and feed them around plants we want to keep. So the important thing is the ground is immensely, thoroughly covered with plant life, and we can just modify that as needed in order to release who we want to. Like, for example, a nice surprise of an asparagus dug up from the side of the road and planted into here. They'll slowly poke up and do their thing, and we can cut and feed the plants that grow around them to release enough light. It's not in love with how shady it is in there, but it grows beautiful asparagus every year. I would guess just this one little block of garden here right next to the driveway on our north-facing slope near a busy road has about 40 to 50 different useful species growing in and amongst in a way that's very compatible. It does require interaction in the form of weeding and cutting, but now it's mainly just chop and drop to feed the selected characters we want to promote. Just on the other side of the pathway to the north of that, another whole layer of wonderful characters. There is arnica, European arnica growing through here. That's this character. It looks a little like plantain. That'll spread through and make beautiful flowers we can harvest for medicine. Baby lupins are popping up all throughout because there are a few mother lupins in here as a nitrogen fixer. We've got another cultivar goji that pollinates with the first one from the first bed. And then for longer term succession, our seedling cornelian cherries. These take quite a while to slowly get up into canopy. There's 2 in here, so they can pollinate one another. And in the long run, that'll be the canopy. They'll replace this peach that was planted by a pit pushed in a couple of years ago. It makes nice peaches, and I know it won't last very long, but we have longer term succession coming up right behind it in the form of cornelian cherry. Lungwort acts as a beautiful shade tolerant ground cover all throughout here. So does giant geranium. And then as it transitions into the understory of our living wall system, we have Turkish rocket, sweet Sicily, and rhubarb acting as amazing dynamic accumulators to feed the overstory of all these beautiful trees. Clearly, it's not the most amazing thing living on a road like this, and for a Sunday, it's pretty low traffic and you can still hear all the noise. You know this from our other videos if you watch the channel frequently, but it's a good reminder that wherever you are, you can try to help design some really extremely rich and resilient and beautiful ecosystems. There are birds that show up here, tons of chipmunks, there's squirrels, there's rodents that show up and they eat seeds and move them around. It creates a lot of good habitat, lots for the bees to browse on. It makes it a little bit more tolerable being on a road with so much traffic. You see the living wall here needs to be pruned back at some point. The redbud just flowers so beautifully that I don't want to do it. But we're learning what the shade tolerance levels are of some of these understory crops. Like I know rhubarb is meant to be a full sun plant, but deep in the understory here, early in the season, it's able to get enough light before the plants really leaf out above it to make a decent crop. We don't harvest this because it's right near the road. This is basically for rhubarb to have rhubarb's life for rhubarb's sake, but we can always dig them up and propagate if we need to. Although I suspect whatever's happening in here is all living in the realm of filter organism for all the fun stuff coming off those cars. So far we've just looked at the eastern side of this space and the southernmost shade area of the shrub layer in there. There's actually a whole interior space that's a bit more sheltered, and this has an immense amount going on as well. The beds are edged with a mix of various nice quality mustards we can eat as a ground cover and a soil holder, and it has Korean celery growing, which is a lovely perennial nutrient dense green that we're slowly working up the numbers of so we can eventually offer it through the website, and understanding what its balances are and tolerances. It grows really nicely with these mustards, so we can harvest them together and eat them. This bed has the same idea of the Korean celery growing, as well as lots of skirret, Siam Sasarum, really wonderful perennial carrot-like vegetable. And this bed we're transitioning away from sunchokes and into perennial Peruvian purple potatoes. There's a lot of peas in there, but that'll help us slowly segue that away from sunchokes. We'll talk about that in greater detail at another time. This bed has some remaining potted plants from last year, which we'll go through and try to offer up to folks as time allows. There's some bands of sunchokes. There's dahlias that our friend Eric from Black Creek Farm and Nursery shared that are an edible dahlia type. There are storage onions through here. There's skirret planted out for actual nursery purposes. There is a trellis system with both schisandra and hardy kiwi growing on it. There are more grafted apples tucked in. There's a couple more pawpaws growing in here that can act as scaffold for the schisandra to grow on. There are another variety of elderberry providing more visual barrier to the edge and out to the road. Tons and tons of debris and slash and material for immense habitat for rabbits and birds. They use this extensively. And a whole bed of cultivar honeyberries planted out, 2 different varieties that will be stool layered and propagated so that we can begin to offer these on the website as well. There's probably another 10 or 15 plants in here that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but you get the idea. There's a lot happening. There's also this high tunnel behind me that we can use to do annual starts, but this year it's growing turmeric for us. So it's a sheltered space from the road. It's a warm microclimate. It's very, very fertile. It receives a lot of water. So we'll grow some medicine in there for ourselves as well. Let me know what sort of questions you have and what sort of ideas you have of what we can add in here or what we should subtract, etc., etc. But the point of this is a little bit of a show and tell, but more to inspire folks. Like, you've heard cars nonstop the whole time. On a quiet day, this is a busy road. We're right next to the road. This is a very small amount of space. It's a north-facing slope. We've got tons of shade from the west. There's also shade to the east. There's only really lots of sun midday, but the fertility is high from deposition of leaves and chicken manure, wood chips, things we can do and get for free. This is accessible wherever you are. You might have a little bit of space. Think about the things you can pack into that tiny amount of space. It's pretty wonderful.